The next step is to go back into our engine class, and then now that we have a ship into our engine script, where we now have the ship class and the player class, and here we will now code another class, which will be the game class. This is now where everything comes together and where we take care of, making moves and checking whether the game is over and all of these things, okay? So let's define this new class, and I'm simply going to call it game. And here we will initialize a function. Well, we will use an initializer function to initialize this class, and there will be lots of things going on in that function. So right now, no additional parameters here, but there will be more in the future. Right now, there is our player 1. So this will be an instance of the player class, and then the same thing for player 2. And then what else? We have to have some way of, saying which player's turn it is. So here we'll just say player 1 turn. This will be a Boolean variable. I'm going to set that to true. So it's player 1 that gets to go first. And then after the end of each move, we'll just set that to its opposite. So then it's player 2 turn because it's not player 1's turn. And this variable will just be switching back and forth between true and false throughout the game. And then lastly, we'll have another Boolean, which is our game over variable. And this will be set to false at first because in the beginning, the game is not over yet. Okay. Now, what is it that we have to have in that class? The main ingredient really will be a function to make moves. Without that, nothing's really happening. And later on, we will be adding some functionality for the AI to make its own moves, okay? But right now, we'll just have a make move function, which will work for both human players and AI players. And all this function has as its input is just an index I. One of the players is making a guess in terms of where its opponent's ships might be. And it does not matter whether that I originated from a human user input in terms of somebody using the mouse and then clicking somewhere on the screen, or whether it was some kind of AI that generated a number, which is hopefully a good guess for where an enemy ship might be. Okay, so self and I. Well, first we'll define what the active player is and what the opponent player is, because they're just stored as player 1 and player 2. Now, technically, we could be using the two players here, and then we could have this variable right here, and we could have two long if statements, so one if statement and then the else statement, and we'll just repeat our own code with player 1 and player 2 in reverse. But I think it's a lot more convenient, and it makes our code a lot easier to understand if we just define what the player is and what the opponent is. So here we'll just say self.player1. Player 1 if self.player1 turn is true, but we don't have to specify that. We can just say if that is the case, and then else currently active player is self.player2. Now I'm just going to copy paste this for our opponent, but we'll swap player 2 with player 1. That's really it. Now, if one of the players is making their move, the first thing that we have to determine is whether they have scored a hit or whether they missed and, just hit the ocean. So set miss or hit. And here, remember in our search grids, where is that? It's right up here. We had this uppercase U to denote unknown. So now let's just use uppercase M and H to denote misses and hits. We will loop through all of our opponent's indexes. So if I in opponent.indexes, well, we're not looping through them, but we'll just be using this handy statement here, if I in opponent indexes, because if that is the case, so if this given index I is in any of the opponent's indexes, we know that it's a hit. So in that case, we'll simply say player, which is us in that case, player search dot I, not dot I, but index I, we'll set that equal to H because now this is no longer unknown, but this is a hit. And if that is not the case, else player dot search I, well then this is a miss. whenever we scored a hit, at some point we will have all of the hits on a particular ship, and then this ship will be sunk. So we have to, whenever we score a hit, we have to check whether that ship is now sunk. So check if ship is sunk, okay? So now we'll set this to, we'll use S to denote a sunken ship. And now we'll say for ship in opponent.ships. Remember, we're just looking at the index, not at a particular ship. So now we got to loop through all of these ships. There's probably a more efficient way of doing this, but since we are not trying to build the best and most efficient engine for playing Battleship, and since Battleship is a pretty simple game anyway, I don't think we have to, super optimize this, but feel free to play around with this. There will be better ways of doing that. For now, we'll just say that there's a Boolean that is set to true, so we'll assume the ship is already sunken, but then we'll say for I in the indexes of that particular ship, if player search I, that is our search effort, if there's a single index that we haven't really asked yet, which is still unknown, in that case, sunk is equal to false. And then we can break out of that while loop here. If a ship is sunk, then we can say for I in ship.indexes. Remember, the other indexes will now be all hits. They will be all H, set to H. And now we can say player.search I is set to S for the ship is now on the ocean floor. Okay. And yeah, that's it for now. Let's see whether that works. So I'm heading back over to the GUI. So here, when we're drawing grids, we now have to also draw the search effort. So right now it's just an empty grid, but we're not really showing where we have guessed already. Remember, there's position grids and search grids. So here we'll just say search is equal to true or false. So here I'll just set this to false. But if it's true, then we'll be drawing the search effort, okay? So if search, in that case, we'll say that we'll have to draw, this little, well, let's make it a circle. So we'll have our grid, our cells. And then if we have asked whether a particular cell is, whether it belongs to a ship, then we'll have a little circle that indicates whether it's water, ocean, or whether it's a hit, miss, or, a sunken ship. Let's just say x plus equal square dot size, and we'll divide that by 2 so that we get the center. So we are using the x that we already have. So we're adding to that half a square, so we're moving into the center. And then we're doing the same thing with the vertical, dimension. So we're adding another half a square here, and then we'll just use pygame.draw.circle, and we'll draw onto the screen in another color, depending on the search. So we might have to define a little dictionary up here. I'm just going to call it colors. And then we'll have unknown squares. We'll make these maybe gray. Then misses will be blue. So gray means they're just the background color. So then we have misses. Then we have hits. We'll make these orange. And then lastly, we have ships that we've already sunk. We'll make these red. And so far, we've only defined green and white. Why do I have 2 color dictionaries here? That's just unnecessary. So let's move this green up here. Green, gray, white. Let's also add some red here. We'll make this 250, 50, and say 100. Then we have to have blue. Blue will be 50, 150, and 200. And then we have to have some orange in there as well. And orange will be 250, 140, and 20. And then we have this dictionary here. And now in our draw ships function, we should now be able to make use of this dictionary. Not draw ships, in our draw grid function within the search part here. And then we can just say, we'll go into our colors dictionary and then ask ourselves within the player that we are looking at right now. So within our draw grid function, we now also have to introduce the player argument. And then we'll say player.search. And then we'll go to square I. And now we have to use the X and Y location. And then we just have to pick a radius, and I think square size divided by 4. That would be a good fit here. So this means that we're not filling out the entire square with our circle, so there's still some wiggle room left at the, around the entire circle. Okay, so grid, we now have to add the player here. So player 1, now we have player 2. Draw position grids, player 1 and player 2. And we already have the ships down here. And now the search grids here will now set search is equal to true. And same thing here, search is equal to true. Let's run this. No errors here, but again, there's nothing drawn here yet because we haven't really done anything like that. So let's go here. Let's go into player 1 and just set the very first search index equal to a miss. So that should now be a blue marker on the screen. And there it is. So this is akin to the first player 1 having asked the other player whether they have a ship in their top left square, and they don't have a ship in there because we set this to a miss. So now let's set this to a hit. And there we go. Now it's orange. So this is working. Nice. And let's set this to S. Now it's a sunken ship. This is working just fine. And if it's unknown, well, then it's just what it was before. Perfect. This is working. So let's just throw in a bunch of indexes here. Let's make this 13, 27, and 58. And unknown, a miss, sunk, and a regular hit. And there we go. We can now see these little circles, and I think this is nice. We are now ready to make some moves to get this thing going here, because now we can actually, implement moves and have a real game. Because we have all the components ready. We have something to show ships. This is what we have here. And we can actually now also show the search efforts in the search grids. So let's delete this part here and go back into our engine where we can recommence our work on the game class, where we left off with the make move part. Well, I think we can actually go back to the GUI, because let's go for a human versus human match and implement within our GUI the, where is that? So right up here where we track our user interaction, we now have to, introduce the mouse click. So let's say user clicks on mouse, and now we'll say if event.type is equal to pygame.mouse button down. So this is similar to key down, but now we have mouse button down. So the user has clicked on the mouse. And then we'll say, well, X and Y, where did the user click? So we'll say pygame.mouse.getPosition, get pause. And then we infer from that the row, and the row is equal to Y divided by the square size. And now we have to bear in mind that this is the row. So let's go back here. Player 1 is not defined. Okay. Now I have to redefine these. Annoying. Player 1 is equal to player. Player 2 is equal to player. So now we have to bear in mind that player 1 searches up here and player 2 searches down here. So this is going to be a bit tricky. Back to here. So the row is equal to Y over the square size, and the column. Okay, so we got to make sure that where the user clicks, that it's within one of the search grids. So here we'll say if game, which we haven't defined yet. I mean, we haven't created an instance of it yet. So, but we'll have that in the future. So if game.player1turn and X is less than the square size times 10. So that's top left. And now we're checking whether we're in that left segment of our 4 quadrants on the screen. And Y is also less than 10 times the square size. So we're just making sure here that it's player 1's turn and the user has clicked on the search grid of player 1. So if these conditions are met, player one's row and column positions are y divided by the square size and x divided by the square size. And then the index of that position is equal to row times, well, 10. We've seen times 10. We've seen this before, plus column. And then we can just say game dot make move at that particular index position. And this will then call within our engine script, the game class, and then we'll go into the make move function and make a move at index I. So yeah, let's see if that works. I'm curious, because then we have to take care of, if player 2 is, if that's the turn of player 2 and so on, so we'll include that down here. Let's run this. Get an error here if game of player 1 and turn, and x, and, oh, what happened here? And y is less than 10 times square size. Let's be consistent here, square size times 10, which is what we have over here. Let's run this. Now let's click up here and we get an error because the game is not defined yet. Yeah, I just talked about this. So let's go up here and say game is equal to game. Let's run this. Game is not defined because from engine we now have to import the game. There we go. Now it says player 1 is not defined. That's not a problem. Because remember down here it says player 1 and not game.player1. So let's introduce this down here as well. Game, game, and game. And now I'm going to click here, get an error. It has no attribute player turn. Now what's the problem here? Player1.turn. This is important. Oh, I should have seen this before. I'm going to run this again. And there we go. I just made a click and it worked. So now I can click and it's always player 1's turn because, well, we haven't really introduced the turn switching yet. But the cool thing is in this position here, which is the one right here, we now scored a hit. So I'm going to click this again. Same thing here. We got another hit. Now, if I choose this square here, this is the one over there, I should not get a hit. And I do, and yeah, that's not a hit. So let's go back up here. And now if I click this, these 3 dots should turn red. And in fact, they do. We've sunk that ship. If we click all these squares around there, no more hits here. So let's go up here, sink that ship. Okay, now this is pretty easy because I can see the solution right there. Sunk that ship. And now let's sink this ship. And, these are all misses, but if I click within here, I can easily sink that ship too. So this is working just as it should. Wonderful. Let's introduce player 2. So player 2 will be clicking down there. And once we've that, we'll take care of, turn switching and then game over, really. And that's it. We have then created a human versus human player game. And after that, we'll head over to the AI. But for now, we are very satisfied that this is working. The next thing that we have to do is we have to introduce player 2 into the equation. Now, in our user clicks on mouse part here, we had this part where it said if game player 1 turn. So now we have to have something like, well, if it's not game.player1 turn, because then it's player 2's turn. But then we also have to check that player 2 has actually clicked in their search grid. And remember how this was checking whether or not a click was in the top left quadrant of the screen. Now we got to do that for the bottom right quadrant of the screen. So here we are not checking that X is smaller than, half the screen or the size of the first quadrant, the size of the first grid. Now we are checking whether the click, so that is the X location of the click, is larger than the width minus 1 entire grid. So here we're checking whether X is greater than the width minus 10 times the square size, which is really just this here. So, just to be consistent, I'm going to make this square size times 10. And then we're also checking that Y is less than square size times 10, because now we are checking that we are in the bottom again. And yeah, this can't be, because now this is less, so this has got to be greater. Okay, bottom, this is square size times 10. That's the top grid. And now we have to have that vertical margin, I believe. So I think that should be it. I've got to test this. Now let's compute row and column position. Row is equal to y divided by the square size. I hope that this is still accurate. And then column is equal to, well, what's the column going to be? Remember that we are shifted over to the right. Let's first copy this and then think about this. We have to subtract from this square size times 10 and the horizontal margin. Okay, so we have to reset the x value because we are like in the bottom right corner here. Okay, then we'll compute the index and make the move. So this is pretty much the same, but I'm still not sure about row and column here. So I'm going to run this, click here, and I'm going to make a click down here. And this is not working because we have not implemented turn switching yet. So let's go back into our engine class and into the make move part, which is the one down here. And now after we have successfully set misses and hits, so M's and H's, but right down here we'll now change the active team. So here we'll say safe.player one turn is simply equal to not self.player one turn. And that is really all we have to do in terms of, switching turns. Now I'm going to go back over here, run this once more. I'm going to make a click here and another one down there, and the code crashes. So I think we still messed up the indexes. And the problem might be this row thing because we are not taking care of this shift in from the top. So here it's probably square size. You see how I'm really guessing here, minus the vertical margin. So let's see whether that does the trick. Still an error down here. So let's once we clicked into here, let's print row and print column. Let's see whether that works. So I'm now expecting to get 0, 0 out of this, and I get 64, 0. So that is clearly not working yet. And the problem is I'm missing the parentheses here. So let's see whether that works now. 0, 0, that works. And you can see that there is now the points showing up. And I think we have now successfully implemented turn switching. So let's see whether I can get this ship here. Should be the one right here. I get a hit. So I'll now try to sync that ship, and it is working. And player one can also sync ships. We can see that here, just sunk that ship here. So that is working nicely, wonderful. We have implemented player one and player two. Next thing that we got to do is game over, because we could now play this, human versus human. And then at some point, one of the players would have sunk all the enemy's ships, and then we would like the game to actually end.